And of course, ordinary people, because I'm not so sure that a Peking professor actually knows, how to grow rice. I don't know. I'm not from Peking, I don't know how to grow rice. Local farmers have been doing this for generations. You might ask, what did they think of all of this? Why did they not speak out? Well, because they were very much part of the same system. They realized rather quickly that when you tell a local cattle in charge that you cannot increase the crop, you cannot double it within 1 year, that you shouldn't deep plow, 2 meters deep, that won't really help when you do that, or close cropping, well, they too get punished. At best, they get told to shut up and be quiet. At worst, they get beaten up. Their faces shoved into the mud, or cut from the canteen for a week. So it's both a system that relies on systematic violence on the one hand, but also on the willingness of a great number of public officials to actually benefit from that system. You need both. That actually explains how this could go on for 3-4 years.
First of all, thank you for coming. And my question was, I guess during this entire process, from you conducting your research to you writing your novel, were you ever at any point overcome with emotion? Because some of the events depicted in your novel are just
not exactly novels,
but are very graphic and appalling.
Yeah, I don't see it as an insult that you use the term novel. I actually see it as a compliment because I've tried precisely to not get trapped into a big theory of statistics or numbers, but to really show the human stories behind all of this. So I've tried to make it as readable as possible. But I can tell you one thing: when I started in the archives, first I was taken aback by what happened. But then, when you read some of these reports, which are extremely detailed, there are moments where you seriously want to. You're very seriously sick, maybe physically sick by what's going on. I can tell you. What you read in the book is only a fraction of what I had to read. And of course, what I had to read was nothing to what people had to endure at the time. But some of the evidence is so graphic and so detailed and so overwhelming also in quantity that it can be quite sick.
In the handout that we were given, it says that there was Mao's revolutionary romanticism combined with the disastrous weather. Could you mention what disastrous weather also played a part in this, in what happened here?
Yeah, I would not have used the term disastrous weather because I couldn't quite find it, you see. The beauty of these archives is that they show that the weather patterns were, of course, pretty bad. It's a very large country. It would be very surprising if during that period you would not have a typhoon hit the coast, or you would not have horrendous drought somewhere in south, for instance, up in the north near Gansu. So all of that happened, but it was no worse than during the previous 3, 4, 5 years, or the following 3, 4, 5 years. So actually, in one chapter where I look at nature, I show that it's very much a man-made disaster, and the idea that somehow famine can only happen under very adverse climatic conditions may well be true in other situations, but not for the Great Leap Forward.
Thank you very much for sharing the information. I didn't catch before, where is those archives you can access? Is it in mainland China? Is it in Hong Kong? Because I know you were teaching there. And also, I haven't read your book yet, and I don't know if you have any. Is there any interviews you had with people? Because I imagine some of them still survives in Great Leap. And also, what is the other question?
That's quite it already. Well, I have good news for you and I have bad news for you. Let me give you the good news first. If you didn't read the book, it's on sale just outside. So you don't even have to go all the way to a bookshop. The bad news is that the archives I used were opening up in the years before the Olympics. And these are archives by the Communist Party at either the city level, for instance, the Nanjing Municipal Archives, or the Wuhan Municipal Archives, or the county level, or the provincial level. For instance, you know, the provincial party committee in Guangdong will have its own archive. And in one particular case, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs is a central archive. So at all levels, I visited quite literally dozens of them over a period of 3 to 4 years. I spent about 6 weeks, 6 months in total reading through all of that material. Now the bad news is that since the Olympics, the climate has changed. And while these archives are still quite open, a lot of the material has actually been reclassified. In other words, there is, on paper, a law that makes information that is older than 30 years available to, for instance, professional historians. But that law is, of course, interpreted in very different ways in very different places. But overall, the climate is going towards something less open and more restrictive than in the years leading up to the Olympics. Have I been holding this thing all the time and it doesn't even work?
This is a kind of follow-up to her question. Given the official judgment that Mao is 70% right and 30% wrong, are you free to discuss your book and your point of view in mainland China?
Oh, I think so. If you look at, for instance, the Foreign Correspondents Club in Beijing, they ask foreign correspondents to come and give talks. Those are real dangerous people. I mean, these are journalists who talk about China now. I talk about what happened 50, 60 years ago. And I don't think it is as touchy as some of the very, very current problems that some of these journalists for the Wall Street Journal, for the Financial Times, talk about in Beijing. So I'm quite positive about that. But I may be wrong.
About the history of the Japanese occupation taking over the agriculture to ship the food directly back to Japan, the Civil War, well, the war itself, and then the Civil War after that. What was the state of economy for the agriculture that could let Mao make this judgment for the Great Leap Forward to pay his debt to China, to Russia?
Well, the economy was obviously after the Second World War. The economy was severely damaged, as it was in Europe after the Second World War. The damage done by war was massive. But the key point really must be that after 1949, with so-called land reform, productivity actually decreases. But once you start taking away very gradually from 1949 up to the start of the Great Leap Forward in 57, 58, once you start stripping people of every freedom they have or had, the freedom of association, freedom of speech, freedom of movement, freedom to trade, freedom to look after your own plot of land. Once you start collectivizing it, because collectivization doesn't just start with the Great Leap Forward, it's a very progressive thing. Once you start doing that, well, the result is that overall, the overall output actually decreases. On paper, it looks like it's going up, but of course the population decreases enormously over that period too. So by 1957, that economy is not doing particularly well. And one of the key reasons why Mao wishes to push for a Great Leap Forward is precisely because farmers have actually been resisting complete collectivization, have been asking for private markets to be reinstituted. There was something called a little leap forward in 55, 56, and there was quite a severe backlash. But with Khrushchev trying to emulate the United States and overtake the United States, with all these intellectuals having spoken out against the Communist Party. Mao is nothing but the labor force. And in that labor force, he sees the real wealth. So his view is not one about agriculture or about industry. His notion is that a labor force that counts in the hundreds of millions can actually accomplish miracles when harnessed, when used properly. That is his vision of a great leap forward. It's not about agricultural policy, it's about using people and shifting them around like an army, tackling one task after the other, mixing up agriculture and industry. Have farmers contribute to stealing one of these magic markers of progress. Deploy them like an army. And that's where things went wrong.
When you look at when you look at China in the ensuing decades, almost even up to the present time, what social, economic, political ramifications and effects do you still see carrying forward from the Great Leap Forward?
I'm very cautious to make pronouncements about China today on the last 10, 20 years. I like to stick to what I know, and I like to know what I research in great detail. So I'm not one to go into grand statements about, the state of the People's Republic today. But there must be many ramifications, no doubt. If only, for instance, that when people have so little in the countryside, well, as happened after World War II in Europe, they like to see food on the table. In other words, you cannot explain, an increasingly rotund population, or to put it even more forcefully, an obsession with consumer goods, with having bricks and having food. You cannot explain it without reference back to the famine, as happened, for instance, in my country, the Netherlands. There was a famine in 44, 45, and in the 60s and 70s, my parents were very much eager to have more food, more material goods. So that's one pattern. And then another one must be to do with the legitimacy of the party. In other words, the party itself constantly contrasts China today with the past, and very consciously manipulates its own past by showing that today things are so much better than they were in the past. And so, by some very strange twist, that great horror actually contributes to giving some legitimacy to the party today.
First of all, thank you for coming and sharing your experience and knowledge. I have two questions. Previously, for the first question, you said that one country, Taiwan, was acknowledged. I was wondering, when was Taiwan a country? And then the second was, you said how China paid the Soviet Union, like even if we had these distinct people. I was wondering, how did the Soviet Union treat China?
Could you repeat the question?
How did the Soviet Union
treated
China?
after
Taiwan has been an independent country for quite some time.
since when?
Roughly, I believe, 1895 onwards. It was occupied, of course, by the Japanese, but then it became its own country. It's actually a democratic country in which the majority of people. The trick with the Soviet Union is that for a very long time, even people in the countryside, who had gone through all of this horror, themselves blamed the Soviet Union. Earlier on, somebody asked me how did the party explain the famine. I said, well, one trick is to blame nature, another one is to blame counter-revolutions on the ground. But I forgot to mention, it's a very good question, I forgot to mention the other evil outsider, namely the Soviet Union. It's a myth to this day that the Soviet Union actually obliged China to repay its debts, and that China was forced to strip the countryside of every asset in order to meet its obligations. When all the documentation shows very clearly that the Soviet Union was not insisting on repayment, On the contrary, they actually allow them to postpone these payments. They actually offered them grain, they offered them sugar when they realized that there were difficulties, quote unquote. And it gets better. Mao Zedong himself not only wanted to repay his debt to the Soviet Union, but after the withdrawal of Soviet experts in December of 1960, in the middle of the famine, Khrushchev pulls out all his advisors. He's had enough of these tensions between China and the Soviet Union, pulls out all his advisors. Mao decided to accelerate the rate of repayment. He says, look, 1942, in the middle of the war, we had nothing to eat, and we did rather well. Surely we can do the same thing right now. So he forces the country to repay its debts within 3 years, as opposed to a more lenient schedule of repayment. Well, this must be one of the biggest myths around it. The Soviet Union forced China to repay all its obligations. Good question.
Sure. First, again, I'd like to thank you for coming. And then you've been going on a lot about how the farmers and their plight over the course of the famine. And you alluded to this a few questions back, but I'm curious as to how members of the Communist Party themselves were dealing with this famine. Because in the excerpts that we've read, there was one particular chapter, and the title was called Feasting Through Famine. And I found that very interesting to see the other side of the state.
Of course, if you're a small guy, you try to steal a potato and get away with it. At great risk to you and your family, but you have to. You really have to, because there simply isn't enough food to go around. But if you're inside the party, then all of a sudden, what you can take, the amount of what you can take, increases proportionally. And the higher up the scale inside the party, the better it gets. So here, for instance, is the head of the Nanjing Eastern Railway Station. He builds an entire hall, an assembly hall, made entirely from equipment that he has stolen. He's got a couple of trucks, he's got people who help him, goes around driving along the railway line, picks up concrete, picks up machinery, picks up steel beams, anything he needs to build his assembly hall for the Nanjing Eastern Railway Station. The whole thing he builds himself. Same city in Nanjing, in one single month, there's a whole team of investigators sent to Nanjing to find out how much of what is being produced in these state factories is actually being sold at state-mandated prices within the system of the planned economy. They find out that 650 tons of goods in one single month is being just bartered by factories, by units, by state enterprises. I'm the head of a lemonade factory. You are the head of an oil company. Well, I'll give you the lemonade, you send me the oil. We'll just swap. So the higher the office, the greater the opportunity to actually make sure that you get through quite well, so to speak. There is a report about a cruiser that goes up and down the Yangtze River with some 50, 60 high officials on board in the middle of the famine. And they're drinking champagne. They're having meals presented by waitresses in brand new uniforms and high heels. They smoke cigarettes. They stop occasionally to take pictures. The boat is illuminated. The middle of the night. It's like a fairy tale. In the middle of sheer devastation. So the higher up, the greater the opportunity. Say everybody in there has to somehow survive, and everybody tries to subvert that system, the system being the command economy. And to some extent, even factory bosses have to subvert that command economy. They're being given a quota they can't implement. They have to cut corners. They have to make deals with others. They know that the amount of oil that is being allocated to them is not enough. The fuel is not enough. The machinery is not enough. So they have to find ways of doing it. It's a system in which everybody is trying to look after themselves. and hopefully a couple of other people. So if you're a factory worker and you're very lucky, you get a factory boss who actually uses the system to protect his own people. If you're at the village and you're very lucky, and the village head actually uses the system to look after the entire village. But most of the case, that doesn't happen.
Thank you very much. It's that time now to switch over to our book sale signing and reception. So let us continue the conversations out in Commons Court and join me again in thanking our speakers.